organized, but it's going to be a little bit of a ramble because weeds are like that. They're kind of chaotic and messy, and it's hard to know where to start with this conversations, and I have a lot of thoughts on it. So here's my PhD thesis on weeds. And there's a lot that I'm not going to say because I think you've all thought about weeds and probably know quite a bit, but I'm going to try to connect some different ideas to give us maybe another perspective. So, first of all, I go to the garden to clear my head of the weeds and chaos that is life. And I should tell you that my favorite gardening activity is weeding. Not that it doesn't make me crazy like it does for all of us, I'm sure, but, clearing ivy and pulling down the, 3-story high blackberries, I have mastered it. I can almost do it without sleeves on. And tracing the endless spaghetti roots of quackgrass is very satisfying, at least for a few months, or maybe a year if I'm lucky. Or popping buttercups out of friable soil. Imagine that. It was concrete, now it moves. So that's kind of neat. So satisfying, like winning a war. Defending the rights for other plants to grow. A little bit of an endless. So what I want to do here is a little bit of an exploration of our relationship to weeding. And I want to do, I think of it a little bit as a triage, like how do you decide what's important in this moment? How to make it easier to choose the priority weed today. So I'm not talking about like the bigger problem in the world or in the state or in the county. I'm like right here on Vashon in September. And we're going to try to limit it to that. So just a quick definition. Plants that are in the wrong places, does that work enough? We could define, but I'm not going to, the noxious and invasive, non-native plants, those each have their own definitions. There's some overlap. Some plants are included in both categories, etc. Introduced plants, alien plants, exotic plants, but you can just think of it as the plant that's choking out everything. Like we could stop there for this talk. So what are the plants that are unwanted in your garden? I recommend that you, just for a minute, forget about everything you've heard about weeds before and just leave this room for a second, maybe 30 seconds. Close your eyes and visualize your garden. Step in, look around, look up at the trees, the birds, the arbors, look straight ahead at the tall flowers and vines finishing up the summer. And look down at the ground covers, the green leaves, the brown soil, the gray rocks. Enjoy the beauty. You've seen plants you've invited and others that you prefer to have absent themselves. Make a note of a spot or a plant that draws your attention. Now, take warning from the view that elicits tension. Okay, make note of that. Hold on to these images. We may feel it's all too much. More than we can handle, overwhelming, and it is. But here we will attempt to ease the burden. So, as all of us tenders of the land know, the weed problem never ends. We are not naive. So how do we choose what to do? And what are some of the challenges you face? Maybe knees, backs, hips, thumbs? No time to deal with this? Finding someone to do the work with you or for you? Or just plain too much? The overwhelmingness of it all can stop us in our tracks. Maybe the plants are out of reach. You've got a steep slope. Maybe you want to pay someone you're ready to, but the money's not. It can be expensive. It can be thousands and thousands of dollars sometimes, or much more or less. So we're not using herbicides, most of us, or hopefully all of us, though this might be a management technique that is reasonable in large acreage. So what about holly, for example, right? We've got holly on large acreage of Vashon that's being managed by injecting it with a poison because otherwise it takes over and nothing else gets a chance. So that's a very specific management technique. Probably not, hopefully not what you're doing on your own land, unless you're, and if you have, you've researched it carefully and have experts guiding you. But at home, we can have a positive impact by just cutting the holly. What part of the holly do you want to cut right now? The berries. Get the berries off the branches. And that's going to be a theme of today's talk. The berries, the fruits, because the birds eat them and spread them around. Not just the holly, but you can probably quickly name 5 other plants. Hawthorn, that's not our native hawthorn. We see very little of our native hawthorn here, but we've got a lot of hawthorn that's a weed, covered with berries. If you can get rid, just cut those branches and bag them up, or so that they don't sprout anywhere, not in your neighbor's yard either. Ivy climbs up and will start having berries up there that it might not have typically doesn't have on the ground. Maybe your goal is to just cut the ivy at you've got a tall tree, you've got the ivy climbing up. If you just cut it at the base, you're gonna limit some of that, but of course if you can get them down, even better. Laurel, cherry laurel. Do you know when that was first brought to the U.S.? Right around like Revolutionary War times, is that what it's called? Or late 1700s. So, it's been around for a while, but, newest on my list, I'm curious if any of you have this on your list, but is the mountain ash. Because it turns out, I didn't know this, but most of the mountain ash we see is a non-native that becomes invasive and outcompetes other plants. So, and I recently, pledging to take one down, the stem was trunk was about this thick, so I could do it with my hand pruner, and it was a convenient place so I could just have it fall over. That was great, but it took me hours before that to be sure if it was really the native or not. So that's a study. It's always a study in some of these plants. So why am I weeding? Why are you weeding? Maybe just peace of mind. Maybe you're removing the toxic plants from the curious kids and the pets and the livestock. Some plants are blatantly toxic, the poison hemlock and the giant hawk. Tansy for cattle, yeah, or sheep, livestock, yeah. For beauty, just looks better sometimes if you get rid of some of the weeds. Meditation, how many people meditate? Enjoy the meditation of weeding, it's kind of a repetitive task you don't have to think about too much. Organizing, feel more organized after that. Maybe prevention. How about prevention? Just because you know that if you don't do it, it's only going to get a whole lot worse. And just to mention a thing about prevention, let's just jump into seeds. So I mentioned fruits, that right now there's a lot of weedy fruit trees that you could remove to limit spread. But how about seeds? Everyone's got a different list, I know that. Mine is the herb robert. Anywhere I go, I remove that plant because once it gets going, you can't catch up with it. Does everyone know what that is? It's a geranium that has a stinky bob is another name for it. Okay, how many people feel like they've seen a lot more of it now in recent years than ever before? Right? So, if you come across a patch, it may or may not be of interest to you to remove it, but it may not be feasible. But what if you come across just a few isolated plants? Get them, and be sure to get get enough of the root that and because you don't want it to re-sprout, but also make sure those flowers don't go anywhere except right into a can or a bag or someplace, because those flowers will produce seeds when you pull them out of the ground and leave them on the path, and you've just sown your next round of stinky bomb. If you go into the literature, you can read about hawkweeds. You see it all around your garden probably, and But there's some new hawkweeds that are on the radar for being super aggressive, super obnoxious. I was going to show you a picture and mention it, but I'm not aware that we have it on Vashon yet, so I'm not going to, I think it's called wall hawkweed, something like that. So, you know, there's always new plants that are new problems. Buttercups, grasses, dandelions. Okay, so seeds right now, September, you may have lost the battle on some seeds, but you can still be looking out for plants that are covered with seeds, right? And get rid of them. And if you're, yeah. So, but what about buttercup or dock or some of the thistles? You know, do you ever try digging in the ground in September? Sorry, I'm not going to recommend that. If you've got the right spot and you can pull it off, great. But for most of us, most of the island, that's not an option. It's concrete, it's rock hard, and your chances of leaving behind some roots are really high. And then you'll just have to plant back again next year. So this is, I would say, if your time and energy are limited, this is not the time to do digging. So take that off your list. Oh, if you're inclined to, go for it. I'm just saying, if we're making a master list of what's more likely to get you the biggest bang for the buck, it's the fruits first, and maybe the seeds second, in my opinion. Certainly the runners, I mean, you can always be pulling ivy, and if you really like pulling ivy, join the team that clears out the Judd Creek, what's it called? Reserve, yeah, every week. I mean, they've been pulling ivy for years already, and it's making a big difference. But anyway, and blackberries, of course. Okay, let's see if there's one or a couple more things we can add before we tie this up. Some things you may not be on your radar, which probably should be. How about Nandina? Heavenly bamboo. Right, I think many of us have it in our gardens. We didn't know how much it can spread and how problematic the fruit can be. It can be toxic to the birds and whatnot.
I don't know if you added this to your list or not, but there's a kind of yellow iris that gets in.
Yellow flag iris. My list is not complete. You're absolutely right. And you know, I'll just tell you that before in thinking about this, I actually went to some of our fine gardeners who's sitting in the room, and I said to them, what's your worst weed right now? Did you think I got, so what did I get? I got 5 people, 15 answers. I'll just list their lists: spotted spurge, willow herb, sheep sorrel, morning glory, bindweed, dandelions, buttercup, bracken fern, knotweed, dewberry, tansy. So, you know, we're not going to name the weeds today, but I did want to say another one that's been on my list for a long time is cotoneaster.
Yeah.
You know that one? That really spreads. I've not seen it on noxious weed list, but it sure spreads. So, you know, again, come back to your garden, your spot. What's bothering you there? What can you have an impact on? What can your body and time still manage, and choose thoughtfully what's going to have the biggest impact?
Hey, Fran, I don't like thistle, I don't like it. But then I was reading that butterflies love it, and that
exactly.
And dandelions, this famous herbalist in Washington State, Rosalie.
So I'm gonna say that you're absolutely right, but I'm gonna stay on a few other topics for the moment
But dandelions are really important.
There are
pollinators.
So that's the problem. That's why we're making our own decisions in our own gardens, because. Look, okay, let's take a different angle on this. We can go to the,
Knotweed is medicinal.
we can go to the King County Noxious Weed Control Board. Let's look at their list, right? Or we can go to the Washington State Weed Control Board. And if you look at, for example, these boards they've created lists A, B, and C, for example. A, you are legally responsible to remove any weeds that are on list A. You can go look it up. No, we don't have time to get into that today. I would say for the most part, we don't have those weeds, so I'm not going to focus on it. They are important around the state, around the county, but Class B are non-native species whose distribution is limited to portions of Washington state. We're recommended to remove them, but use your own judgment. Class C are already so widespread in Washington, but we need to consider them, but maybe can't deal with them. But actually, what I really wanted to, let me just tie this up. Sorry. Can I have my list, please? What I thought was most interesting for us, at the end of A, B, and C, they've got the King County Weed Board has the weeds of concern. And I just want to tell you what they say. They encourage control of non-native invasive plants, because we know a bunch of these, that are not on the state noxious weed list, but have impacts in King County. Plants on this list are considered invasive vegetation in King County's critical areas ordinance. Property owners are not required to control these plants, but good tips. So I'm just going to read you a few of them. Did you ever hear of bishop's weed? Horse chestnut? How about common holly? We talked about, that's on the list. What else? Bird cherry. We could spend 5 minutes, but I'm not going to, talking about bird cherry. Most of we think of that as a native, but it's actually a native that crossed with a long time ago, and now without genetic analysis, you can't even know exactly which one you have, according to experts I've consulted with. And I'm going to tie this up and tell you what 3 expert references in just the next thing I talk about. So cherry laurel, buttercup, hey, these are all things we talked about. Multiflora, rose, etc. Okay, bittersweet, nightshade, European mountain ash. Okay, that's a relatively short list. It's only 20 plants or something. Mm-hmm.
Can you get a copy of
Yes.
that so we can distribute it?
We can share this in all sorts of ways. Let me just tell you again the critical places for you to look. I already mentioned, and I'll share the website links, but King County and the state have lists. But also, you've got the Native Plant Society and the Master Gardeners have some helpful resources as well. But I also discovered, are you familiar with this new book? This is an Islander, Seth Zuckerman, and you can hear him speak, I think it might be next month at BCA, I'm not sure. But this is really interesting. I didn't even realize A Forest of Your Own, the Pacific Northwest Handbook of Ecological Forestry. I just happened to have gotten it from the library. I didn't realize he's got a chapter on invasive species, but his talk, and a few others, but anyway, he talks about it in a very, a more practical kind of way, like I tried to bring into this talk. It's like, we know we care, we know there's a big problem, but how are we going to personally interface with it? That's a decision that we each get to make, and I think I had, so this is, can I say 2 more things I forgot to say? Are we done?
2 minutes.
2 minutes? Okay. Soil as a living organism, personally, that's my bias. I trained in medicine. I'm used to thinking of gut health. The greater the diversity of microorganisms in the gut, the healthier we can be. Soil is exactly the same. So if you want to treat the soil with the same compassion and care that you treat your plants, your other plants, your pets, your kids, the soil is worth it. And is it simple and easy? No, it's ongoing, but you get results. And one thing we didn't mention is when you've got a lot of weeds, you can always mulch. That's another option. Cover it up. We've talked about that before. But the last thing I'm going to say is my favorite, something I learned a very long time ago that I live by on a regular basis. It's called remove the obstacle to cure. Okay, that's a medical terminology, but what about in your own garden? Remove what's really going to get in your way and cause big problems, including our native raspberries that are tripping you. How many of us in the room are facing tripping hazards? Or your neighbors, you have neighbors that have blackberries that are crawling into the path. We want those blackberries because they're great, we love them, but get them out of the path so you don't trip on them. Thank you.